Greetings, all. I am so glad that you could join me for this kind of look at Black Moon Lilith conjunct Venus at the seed point of her new cycle. I am coming to you with this recording because together we had like this lovely gathering that was really devoted to this conjunction. And at that gathering, I forgot to hit record. And so there wasn't a replay of that. But I think this is such an important aspect of this upcoming cycle that it really is important. And I really think of service to land the medicine of what these two speak to when they come together. And especially at the seed point, or in the, what I mean by seed point is in the chart of the upcoming Venus cycle. So at the moment that she made her conjunction with the sun, Black Moon Lilith was in a conjunction with those two. So it kind of brought together these three energies of Venus, the sun, and Black Moon Lilith. And so it kind of points us to this energy that we'll be working with the next 19 months. And so earlier I had sat down to make this recording, and in it, I realized that I was really trying to recreate the experience that we had on the call. And I got very mental inside of that transmission. And so I'm going to try and just give a transmission and not have it be anything other than what it is, instead of trying to recreate an experience like I did with this first recording. So that being said, let's begin with Venus and who she is as we begin to kind of like thread apart these energies, right? So Venus is, for me, the way I work with her is that she is the essence of she. She is the essence of the feminine. A lot of times we attribute Venus to this kind of like Aphrodite expression, or the way that she was held in the Roman pantheon of goddesses. And in that pantheon, she was just this goddess of love, and she kind of held this cord or thread of femininity. And when we come in and begin to work with the feminine, oftentimes the feminine and femininity can be, they can be kind of interchanged for each other, but I think they are very different. And it's worth sort of an exploration of what is the actual feminine. And part of why I like working with Venus so much, and I can say this with 100% authority, is because when we really begin to understand Venus in her greater cycle, we understand that we're not just talking about a feminine affect that we put on kind of for the sake of, like, I don't know what that is, being in our feminine, quote unquote, in our feminine. This is the feminine. So Venus is the template of the feminine. What's really, really neat about Venus is that we map her cycle onto the myth of Inanna. So the ancients were out doing, star mapping, and they noticed Venus's astronomical movements in the sky, and they created this great drama or saga about Venus. And she starts her cycle, which is close to where we are at this moment, very high in the morning sky, right? So she's morning starred, she's very high and very bright. And she kind of takes on this sort of solar emanation. In the Mayan culture, this was the most potent emanation of Venus, and they often would declare war right at this point because she's so powerful in this kind of like exalted, almost warrioress kind of expression. But then if we remember the myth of Inanna, Venus does exactly what Inanna does in the myth. She ends up appearing to descend in the sky over the course of the next 9 months and then fall below the horizon, which is the underworld. And she stays there for about 60 to 90 days. And then she rises in the evening sky and does a whole journey of coming back up through the gates. So in the morning star expression, Venus essentially is descending through these 7 gates to the underworld, right? And then she has her whole underworld experience. And then after that experience, she ascends, she rises. This is where we get that kind of idea of the goddess rising. And the descent journey really is a journey of disrobing. It's a journey of kind of taking off all of our false vestments of power and kind of having these, like on the way down, these mini ego deaths until we arrive naked and bowed low in the underworld in front of the underworld deity of Ereshkigal. And the underworld really is a place of like piss, shit, blood, vomit. You know, it's the rage and the anger and all of our kind of like unclaimed or repressed pieces. We find them in the underworld. And as we begin to integrate them and make ourselves a feast for the demons to kind of, you know, pick the bones, pick the meat off of our bones, really the underworld experience, what it does is it kind of takes off every single thing that is not us. And it reveals the glorious essence of who we are, this experience of having descended and gone into the alchemical chamber of Ereshkigal's throne room. And then inside of that experience, with everything that is not us kind of taken from us, we begin the ascent journey. And the ascent journey really is like this reclamation of true power and authenticity. And so as we're rising on the other side of Venus's cycle, we are arising in a more aligned and kind of truth-filled place. And so as you can see, throughout her 19-month journey, Venus really does take on the expression of all of the different goddesses. And if we look at Venus as a planet, right, she is whole, she is holistic, she is a sphere in and of herself. She is the blueprint or the template of the feminine. And this is the kind of like embedded in it is the 10,000 faces of the goddess, as Joseph Campbell called it. And I think this is really true. Like when we map on this idea of as above, so below, we are whole people, right? We are whole in our humanity. There's no woman on the planet who is only ever expressing from like the archetype, the goddess of love. We are, you know, holographic people, and we have every single expression that encompasses being the divine in density, right? Or having an immanent, which is the downward flow, having an immanent experience, and even having a transcendent experience, which is the upward flow, right? So the immanence is the descent into the body, and that's the morning star phase of Venus. And the transcendence is the ascent phase of the Venus cycle, and that is having kind of shed and being lighter. We're now kind of coming into a more transcendent expression. We could always also look at these as the expression of Taurus being the immanence, the erotic in the body, and Libra being transcendent, right? So like the expression of love is flowing outward and upwards. So I guess it's just helpful to understand that when we're working with Venus, we're working with the full blueprint, right? The full holistic download of what it is to be incarnate with the spark of divinity inside of us. So that's what we're pointing to with Venus. Then what happens is when I'm looking at a chart, so I see Venus conjunct the sun, and both of these bodies have a quality of animism inside of them. They have an animating quality. The Venus has this very erotic current that runs through her. It's kind of erotic, connection to the current of life force that moves and vitalizes our lives. But with Venus, it is it's an internal thing. Like it moves upward from below the feet, it comes in through, the womb and up then through the heart. And with the sun, it's more of a penetration of light and how we respond to that light that animates things. We can think of like, when the sun hits a flower or a tree, that it's penetrating with its light the leaves of the tree, and then it's asked to respond. So then photosynthesis happens, and there's this whole process in which the plant then responds to the sun penetrating it in all of these really beautiful ways. But Venus's power, then, we understand, is sourced kind of from within. It's from within to without. It's the intimacy of knowing who we truly are and being rooted in the seat of that truth, and then being able to express that outwards, to be connected to our eros, and to have attunement and intimacy with the things around us is Venus. And so Venus and the sun coming together is this very kind of like erotic and vital part of the chart meeting. And that's why in the transmission that I did about this conjunction, I called it the bridal chamber. This is Venus, the goddess, meeting with sun, source, the god, and being embedded with new codes. It's a really vital and important part of the astrological, what would we call it, eon, every time that she meets, right? She resets a template. There's a new invitation that goes out. There are new codes that we can integrate and embody as women. And so when one of these, then inside of astrology, we have asteroids and what we would kind of look at as like lesser feminine bodies. When one of those bodies comes and sits beside Venus, what I'm looking at as an astrologer is like, oh, here's a fractal or a piece of the feminine that is being highlighted right now. And so we need to pay really close attention to what the medicine of that particular fractal is, because it's going to be showing up a lot in the next 19 months. So Venus being in Leo, in the temple of the sun, Leo is ruled by the sun, and having the seed point of her chart be a conjunction, or of her cycle be a conjunction with the sun, already speaks to this kind of quality. I love this. I'm sitting in front of a window and there's so much light coming in, and my hands almost look like they're lit up, my fingertips do, as they talk. And it is so kind of in the spirit of what we're talking about. It's just kind of really, it's really neat if you're watching the video version of this. So anyways, Venus being in the temple of the sun is always about the source of our essence, like the quest to find the source of our essence, and then to be able to move that essence outwards and share it with others. It's kind of like, we know that there is a vessel of nectar contained in each one of our bodies, but sometimes it's kind of like kept in a hard outer shell, and something needs to come and penetrate that vessel so that the essence can ooze outwards. And that's really what Leo is about how do we let our most radiant self shine. And with Venus here, there's this really creative and intimate and attuned current that goes along with that. It becomes an almost expression of erotic innocence in all of the ways that we show up. We can show up, and by eros, I'm not talking just about sex. I'm talking about erotic vitality, life force. There's a current of kind of our sex that can be brought into every aspect of our lives, and not in an affect way, like where we're putting on a show. It's just where we're connected to that thing. And so we're on, right? So what is Black Moon Lilith, and how do we understand how she is relating to these two other archetypes? Well, Lilith is a really interesting archetype. We first kind of see Lilith show up right at the turn of when the lunar cults are dying out, and the lunar cults are the matrilineal civilizations pre-patriarchy. And then the solar cults come online, and the solar cults are really what birthed patriarchy. And I don't want to demonize the sun or even the solar cults, because some of them have a really beautiful kind of essence to them. It's only like how man has kind of harnessed and then distorted the message of the solar cults that has caused the kind of great conundrum we find ourselves in now. So when I'm speaking of lunar and solar cults, I'm not meaning to demonize any of them. However, it's Lilith kind of is this written in by man, and we can see how she changes. So in the Babylonian cults, she is kind of that expression of the goddess that is animal, that is erotic and natural and sexual in nature, right? One of the really interesting things that happens at the kind of juncture of moving from the lunar cults, in which the goddess was one, the goddess ruled kind of like the magical sexual cycles of life. And so she ruled birth, life, and death, and was one, just like Venus is, right? She was one being. And when the solar cults came online and people were able to grapple with and distort and change, I guess I was thinking I should get into some of the history, and that might be something we do in Sky Dancer, but just take my word for it. Humans took the intention embedded inside of the solar cults, and for the first time, men were getting the recognition that they kind of fought for. They had their own kind of like male revolution. We'll lightly call it that. That's not exactly what it was, and so then everything became distorted. And so we see, like at the beginning of Genesis, when Genesis was written in the Christian Bible, and even for the Jewish, we see that God now becomes the ruler of life. And so it's God who creates light and creates the planet and creates the oceans and creates night and day. And then the goddess herself is split into two. And I'm going to explain how that happens. But it is the males taking on birth that then subjugates sex and death as all that's left with the goddess. And there is this kind of fractal split inside of her. And so some of the best writing we have about Lilith comes in during this time. And in the Jewish pantheon, or I'm not sure if I should say pantheon, in the Jewish tradition, Lilith is the first woman. And this is what is kind of written in the Zohar. So God makes man, Adam, out of the clay of the earth. And then he takes a different kind of earth that could be seen as like ash and, I don't know, mead or something like this, peat, heavy earth, and makes woman. They're both made out of earth, but it's kind of a different kind of earth. And the intention is to populate the world. And inside the garden with them is every different species and genus of plants and every different kind of animal. And everybody is kind of set to this job of procreation. And when it comes time for Lilith and Adam to make love, Adam tells Lilith, you need to lie underneath me. And Lilith says, no, I'm not going to do that. We're equal. We're here in the garden. And so if we're going to have sex, it's going to be like this kind of exercise of equality. So God comes in and he says to Lilith, you can't do this. Adam is your man and you have to listen to him. And Lilith says, no, I'm not going to. And so in order to get Lilith to listen to him, God does this, like, I don't know, it must have been that he only meant to do it for a temporary amount of time, but he exiles Lilith to the edges of the wilderness, and he lets her sit there for a while. And Lilith really doesn't mind this. You know, keep in mind, she's got this really natural kind of animal sexuality, sensuality to her. And so she's kind of like really powerful, right? And she's like, if you leave me alone here, I'm going to be fine. And eventually God comes back and says, you know, we really need you here in the garden. I mean, this whole project of populating the earth has gotten up and running and we're falling behind. So would you come back? And she says, well, would I have to lay under Adam? And he said, yeah, that's part of the deal. And she said, no, I will absolutely not come back. And so at that point, God curses her to be the mother of demons. And he gives her this like kind of voracious appetite to cavort with demons and have demon children. This is the myth, right? The myth from the Zohar. And then at some point, God decides, well, Adam needs a woman. And apparently he's only going to take a woman that will lie under him. So I'm going to make this next woman out of his rib. And then we get the story of Eve. And that's the only story we ever get in Christianity, is the story of Eve. And then Eve turns into a temptress in that story. But Eve really kind of, in a sense, represents the light feminine, or the virgin. You know, she becomes the woman who sticks by Adam's side and the mother of civilization. And she, you know, eventually does what she's told to do. She takes her punishment willingly to have pain in childbirth, right? And then so thus we begin to see the fracture between the light and the dark emanations of the feminine. In the Zohar, it further goes on to explain that Eve, or Lilith, in her anger and desire to get revenge on Adam, comes back into the garden one night after he's married and doing this stuff with Eve, and she seduces him and she makes love to him. And that this is sort of where the curse, quote unquote, curse of nighttime emissions or ejaculation comes from. It's the curse of Lilith, right? And we could see in this kind of like how they're framing Lilith as really this wild, not subservient, not submissive woman who, you know, if you're wild and subservient, what do we do in our culture? We have to demonize you, right? You following me so far? Okay, good. Just stay with me. And this is, I think, the birthplace of the virgin whore split that is then further reinforced through the Christian story of the Marys and how we held Mary Magdalene for so many centuries. But I digress. That's a different story for a different time. So, you know, very often in our like feminine communities over the years, as I've studied, you know, one of the places that we really look to kind of just like understand the patriarchy or dominator culture's aversion to this particular expression of the feminine is the witch burnings. It was as though every time a woman had any kind of power or sovereignty, she was in danger of literally being killed, right? But, you know, one of the things I wanted to look at, and what we looked at on the last transmission I did, was actually how current, meaning across our historical timeline, the fear of being a fully self-expressed woman actually exists. And so one of the things I brought through, because it was something I just realized, was the continuation of the witch burnings. Like they ended in the mid 1600 or the mid 1800s, but they continued in just a different form. And that form is the Magdalene laundries. They have a really rich and extraordinarily dark history. And so it was like, oh, okay, so I guess it's not exactly legal to just burn these women at the stake. I'm trying to fix my camera here, sorry. Anymore. So, but we need something to do with them. They cannot be integrated into society. There was just such a fear of a powerful woman that they decided that we need a place to put these powerful women. And so they started these institutions. And I'll be honest with you, they didn't just start like in Ireland. Like we hear about the Magdalene laundries and how they're associated with Irish theocratic culture, but they were everywhere. They were in every continent. And I don't know how to make, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt the flow here. I've just got so much sunlight coming in on me now. Anyways, they were on every continent in a different kind of form, these kind of homes. And women could be put into these Magdalene laundries for any reason. I mean, there could be like drunkenness, or she could just like misbehave, show willfulness, and her family could commit her to an institution that was run by the clergy and and meant to kind of the laundries are where we wash linens, right? To wash the sins away. But they really became dens of coercive control. And, you know, I think there was an intention to make the conditions inside of the laundries so intolerable that it kept women outside of the laundries in control. Women inside of these laundries were sexually abused by the people that ran them. They were absolutely psychologically and emotionally abused and degraded and humiliated and shamed. They were physically abused. The only way to get out of one of these laundries, they existed beyond the idea of due course. So they're like due process. So they existed outside of the bounds of law. So they were essentially women's reformatory prisons in which a woman could be sent there with no end date. It wasn't like she had a sentence. It was like she just was institutionalized ad infinitum. And the only way that she could get out of one of these places that were highly, highly lucrative, because they were extracting labor from the women and not paying them for it, was if a family member, a male family member, came and took her out. So this is kind of like the late 1800s into the early 1900s. And then as time went on and women started to fight for more of their rights and had a bit more agency, it's like these homes evolved again. And they ended up becoming essentially what we would think of now as mother and baby homes, but they weren't mother and baby homes exactly. They were a large human trafficking network. And I know this because I myself am the daughter of a woman who was sent away to a mother and baby home and who had her child removed and sold out from underneath her probably without her consent, right? Not like her true consent. There was an entire network of language that was put into place to have women surrender their babies. And it is illegal to sell a child yourself. And so the money was made through the facilitation of the adoption process. The people who got to make the money were the people who facilitated and harvested essentially the child for other couples who wanted to buy the child. And it is still, adoption still is the private adoption industry is still a multi-billion-dollar industry today. And what's really interesting is that like I was introduced to Lilith through this book. I was probably 20 when I read it, called The Witch of Cologne. It's by an author named Tobsha Lerner. And it's all about this young training midwife who becomes a midwife during the Spanish Inquisition, which was a time in which they were burning and jailing women and killing them, you know, like free reign. This is the 15th, 16th century across Europe. And Cologne is a German speaking place. And the women that she would attend who were in labor, they would have an amulet that they hung above the birthing bed. So while they were giving birth, this amulet was supposed to keep them safe from Lilith visiting them and stealing or killing their baby. And so Lilith became associated long before these homes were in operation. She became associated with child loss. And then it became that any woman who had the animating, gorgeous, erotic power of Lilith was at risk of losing her child. And you really got to think about it. Like, I was born in 1979. That's not that long ago. I'm 43 or 4. I'm 43, I think. Yeah, I'll be 44 in like 2 months. And these homes did not close across the country until 1996. And I'm sure there's some legal form of them still happening today. But imagine, if you will, like, if you understand what epigenetics are like understanding that inside of our DNA, we have inherited trauma that gets activated without the trauma having happened to us. It could have happened to our foremothers or ancestors. So we really understand that, like, even like every one of our mothers kind of grew up in a society in which, you know, she was at risk of potentially losing her freedom. She was definitely at risk of losing her child. And I've got to say that having that kind of punishment hang over your head and then actually be carried out if you do get pregnant and have a child is the most evil thing on the planet. To take a woman's child away from her without her consent and give it to somebody else to raise because she is somehow bad and wrong, and that child is the spawn of the devil, and that child will supposedly carry the sin of the mother all their lives if the mother doesn't relinquish the child. That's heavy. That's evil. That's true evil. And then to make money off of that pain, there are people who have got a lot of karma coming their way. So, you know, what does this mean for us, essentially? Like, why is Damascena telling us this long story about the horrors of being a woman inside of dominator culture? Well, I mean, essentially why I'm telling the story is because this split and this fear still exists inside of the psyche of each and every one of us. And why does Lilith, who is she? How do we look at her from an astrological perspective? So for me, Lilith carries, and you'll see with the name why I told this whole story, she carries the name or the archetype of the death mother. And that sounds really heavy, doesn't it? The death mother. And you may be thinking right now, like, I had a great mom and a great experience with my mother, so I don't resonate with that. But I'm going to explain to you what the death mother archetype is. It doesn't have to be your mom. It definitely doesn't. You could have a death mother father. You could have a death mother society. Some of the Eastern cultures or Middle Eastern cultures today are death mother societies. So we think in the West, women have come a long way. And a lot of us have really liberated a lot of our sexual expression, or Lilith isn't just sexual expression. She is expression, period. Like the capacity to be fully self-expressed lies inside of alchemizing the death mother within us, or being in relationship with it, essentially. There are so many women today that just don't even have the opportunity to do this work. And so I'm very grateful that we in the West do. And I hope that everybody will commit to doing some level of this work so that our sisters in the East get an opportunity to do this for themselves at some point, like really, so they're safe to do it. So what is the death mother? So the way I hold the death mother is what is the death that happens inside of the critical intent to kill something inside of us psychologically. And so I know that sounds like a bunch of psychological mumbo jumbo. Let me explain from a practical standpoint. So you have a child, a little girl who's like 4 or 5 years old, and she just happens to have gotten out maybe of the bathtub and she's still naked. And she notices that in the backyard, her father has turned on the sprinkler. And so she runs outside in her nakedness and in her innocence and in her joy to hop in the sprinkler in the backyard. And one of the adults around catches her and says, "Oh, you can't be out here. Look at you. You're naked. Shame on you. You don't get to be out here like this. This is shameful. It's disgusting. Nobody can see your private parts. It's dangerous." Criticism like that. So instead of going and getting the little girl and saying, "Oh, honey, do you want to put your bathing suit on?" Or just letting her have her innocent expression, there is a critical intent to kill the part of her that thought it was okay to be naked outside. That's the death mother's energy. Let me give you another example. So inside of the vaccine debate, I saw this come up. So, we had people who were pro-vaccine and people who were against the vaccine. And essentially, the people who were pro-vaccine thought other people should get it so much that they didn't just say to the people who didn't want to get it, "Yeah, I just don't agree with you, so I'm going to get it." They said things to them like, "I hope you don't get treated at the hospital as punishment for not getting the vaccine." That's death mother energy. Or they said things like, "You are going to kill my grandma if you don't get vaccinated. You are a murderer." That's death mother energy. We see it everywhere online. I mean, the amount of like just kind of shaming, critical intent to kill the part of us that thinks it's okay to express that way. So somebody who didn't get the vaccine thought it was perfectly fine to not get that vaccine and have that be part of the expression of their lives. And the people who disagreed thought they should die for it, right? Or they thought them murderers. There is a critical intent inside of the reflection that intends to psychologically kill part of our expression. I know that sounds very heavy. Another place where death mother energy crops up is in middle school. I'm noticing this with my daughter. She's got a very big and beautiful presence, and some of the girls are literally just threatened by her very presence and her bigness and her capacity to express herself. And they want to annihilate and cancel her, right? And the death mother feels like annihilation. So when you get a criticism in the energy of the death mother, it's that kind of criticism that literally floors you. It stops you. It's like an injection of poison. And over time, what happens, the death mother sort of like, we have these kind of two main responses. Let me say there's a spectrum and it's nuanced across the spectrum, but there's these two main responses that I've tracked with clients. And the first one is a state of freeze. So like we get this criticism as a 5-year-old girl about our bodies and being outside, and it shuts down the expression of our body and who we think we can be as naked, natural animal creatures, right? And then this whole constellation of neuroses or complexes and fears crop up in the spot where that injection was placed into us, and we freeze. And so that part of us doesn't have expression. Like if you were to run water through my body, and if I didn't have any of these things, I didn't have any death mother energy embedded in me, the water would run just quickly, smoothly through my body without being stopped on anything. But with the way I see it is kind of like the Swiss cheese, like the places where I have taken on the projections of the death mother are these places where I've got this energy stuck. So now you pour water through me with the death mother projections inside of me. and the energy is stopping up in these places. And essentially, I've become Swiss cheese. So that's one response that people commonly have to the Death Mother. The second is this very golem-y, kind of hungry, destructive response. It's rebellious. It's the kind of rebellion that people give you when they will make you look at their shame, you know? So it's rebelling against being shamed, except there's a real thread of self-destruction inside of it. Like it can't hold the shame. It doesn't want the shame. It's going to throw it back on you, but it does it in a very almost drunk, messy, and explosive way. It's not grounded and contained. And really, a lot of us just have a combination of the two. Like if we look at ourselves as teenagers and how we responded to these things, we'll see that there are some places where we froze, maybe depending on our age and our level of being able to alchemize comments like that, and other places where we might have rebelled. We're human, so there's always a spectrum of how we handle things. And so that's kind of Lilith, right? In her, that's how she works, like in her unconscious expression, right? And this is how we can work with her in the reclamation of the Death Mother. So what would that look like? So essentially, Lilith in her most exalted form is sovereignty. It is deep reunion with the animal qualities within us, and deep reunion with the erotic expression of life force that wants to move through us, right? It is deeply powerful. And so really it's sovereignty. It is the ability to express without being shut down from the places that the Death Mother kind of like got her hooks into us. It's the ability to express without caring what other people think. And it's not that we don't take into consideration other people's thoughtful, grounded reflections to us. It's just that if it's really true for us to do the thing, Lilith gives us the courage to not be stopped by someone else's reflection. And she goes really well in Leo. It's such a beautiful place for her because it gives us this opportunity to really go in and do some inner child healing work and look at like the places where the Death Mother has really shut us down and frozen us, petrified us, caused paralysis, stasis inside of our expression, and to clear that out. But I will tell you, if you're not working with this energy during the cycle, we've got Leo, gorgeous sun, gorgeous Venus, beautiful, dynamic, expressive conjunction at the seed point of the Venus cycle, and then conjunct Black Moon Lilith. What it might look like if you're not working with this conjunction is it might look like at every turn in which you try and unleash your beautiful radiance, that Lilith is coming in and shutting that down. And so it could feel like I've got this great intention to work on my expression here, but without bringing in the Lilith piece, it can really look like I'm really just not able to make any headway because all of these unconscious pieces of the Death Mother keep coming up and stopping me. And so part of just because I want to wrap up here, I've been talking for quite a while. I think this transmission just feels so much cleaner and clearer than the one I made before. Part of the work we will be doing in Sky Dancer, because this conjunction happens at the seed point and it is so strongly entwined with the archetype, with the energies of, this is the conjunction. So it's like think of the conjunction as the seed point, and then all of the energies at the conjunction are part of the seed that's buried in the ground that will grow. So this is definitely something that we will be working on, and why I named this iteration of Sky Dancer Reveal. What's so beautiful about working with the Venus path and with Venus medicine is the curriculum always changes based on the conversations Venus is having and the invitation she's extending to us at the moment, at the seed point of the cycle. And so we can really see, it's been so fun to be online and see how many people are talking about things like full expression, erotic expression, and whatever. And it's just beautiful to see how many people, many women especially, are connected to the Venusian current, maybe without even knowing about it, right? Like it's really neat. And so if you are interested at all in doing the work inside of Reveal, doing this work with the Death Mother, really getting to learn the Venus cycle, understanding how we sync with Venus, how we use, Venus and her transmission to really template a beautiful spiritual path for us, to make sure that we're really doing the kind of evolutionary work we're being called into. There is an application for that. Applications are open. We're going to begin in September. I'm just in the pre-application phase right now. I have kids at home. I'm a human, like we talked about up front at the beginning of the call. There's this human and divine thing, and it's like I've got my kids just going off to school, which is always a big part of the year. And so we're going to begin in September once I get a few little pieces put together, but I am taking applications right now. You're welcome to put your application in. I would love that. It's always a really gorgeous, deep journey. And lots of intimacy crops up within side of Sky Dancer with the participants. It's just really beautiful. So yeah, I'd love to see your application and have a conversation with you about Sky Dancer Reveal if it's something that you're interested in. So thanks for listening. I really, really appreciate it. And I do think we'll have one more gathering regarding this Venus cycle and maybe take a look at her whole chart and do questions. So look for that coming up as well. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.